For the past several months, a group of churches in Jamaica Plain has been mobilized for the Black Lives Matter campaign. That means everything from standing up against vandalism of the campaign's banner. It also means raising awareness by looking inside and outside the community, even to Ferguson, Missouri. Our guests are one of the organizers of the series of Vigils in Jamaica Plain, community activist Ann Philbin, and the Life Together fellow at Episcopal City Mission, recently back from a pilgrimage to Ferguson, Reverend Ashton Murray. I'd like to thank you both.
Thank you for having us, Chris.
I want to start with Reverend Murray about making the pilgrimage to Ferguson. You went with some young people. I think this is a group of young people who are very much aware of what's going on. So why do they have the urge to hear and see more?
Well, I think that we were organized by the National Episcopal Church, and it was a pilgrimage for young adults who were interested in the issues of racial and social justice. And so they brought us there so that we could have a ministry of presence and take back what we learned back to our home dioceses and states and continue the work. And really made sure that we understood what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and to, in our own ways, find our Ferguson moments here. That was a sending charge that we were all received.
Yeah, you can think of things that have been happening along the trajectory of this movement, whether it's with Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, or even the mass shooting in Charleston, South Carolina. Right. And a lot of viewers may say, well, that's not happening around here, so why are people here concerned about that?
Well, it is happening in many forms here as well. I mean, racial injustice based on race is systemic and is happening in our criminal justice systems, our schools, housing, pretty much in every walk of life. So I think for white people, it can be easy to not see it because it's not happening directly to them. But I think our group really feels like it's important to stand up for racial justice and stand against white supremacy. There have been plenty of young people of color unjustly arrested, imprisoned, and killed here in our area as well.
Reverend Murray, what did you hear in Ferguson about what was going on with the police, not just with what happened to Michael Brown, but on almost a day-to-day basis there?
Yeah, you heard that there's a system in place of kind of persecuting black folk and brown folk in Ferguson, Missouri. The way that historically, as black neighborhoods grew and became empowered themselves, places of pride, how the city would kind of come in and decimate those places and take away the land. And so you learn that this wasn't an independent event. This was a systematic problem that led to a Michael Brown. And you learn that there are other Michael Browns in Ferguson and the rest of the country. And they don't always end in shootings, but they end up in our criminal correction systems, with there being more African Americans in the correctional system now than were enslaved in 1860. So what we really took away learning was that this was a systemic issue that we had to think about. I think that one of the things we just talked about is what's happening in the country all over. Another thing, other than explicit racism and explicit assaults against black bodies, I think we have to think about is those implicit biases that allow those to happen. And that was one of the things we talked about on the trip, is what are ways that people have internalized racism and oppression and don't realize it or recognize it.
Yeah, and this is, again, it's not just about other places. Talk about here, and maybe here it's not even exclusively about the police either.
No, I wouldn't say it's exclusively about the police, although because of the final attention to police brutality and unjust killings, it's really lifted the perspective on the police. But and I think for folks involved in the vigils, we wanted a space where we could stand against white supremacy and white privilege and for racial justice, create an opportunity for people to come together and in unison denounce what's been happening to black men, women, and children, really.
Well, and it's also interesting how the vigils have picked up because of the vandalism. Now, on the one hand, yes, you could say, well, there are a few cowards out there who do things like this. We don't have to give them a platform. But on the other hand, I guess you don't want to ignore them either.
No, I think it's very important not to ignore them. If anything, I think that conversation is one that's really important to have. A number of times people have seen us at the vigil and called out either in a car or a bike, all lives matter. Mm-hmm. And we really want to take that message up because, well, for me personally, because I've spoken some about this at the vigils, when people say all lives matter, it makes me feel like they're denying what has happened historically to people of color in this country and acting like the sort of Horatio Alger myth that we all start in the same place and we all have equal chance to make it is true. And it can be more patently false, and that's part of the really mirage, I believe, that white people live under because they live a privileged existence. So taking that on, that message, and really explaining why it's important to lift up the value of Black life is a key part of our purpose.
Reverend, what about what you took back from Ferguson? Anything that maybe made you feel that you yourself have changed in some way about what you want to do?
Yeah, I think that it's funny. We went to the Canfield Greens apartment complex where Michael Brown was murdered, and his body stayed in the street for 4 hours. And the street was lined with stuffed animals and balloons and toys and candles. And I remember standing there, and there's a line from Scripture in the Cain and Abel story where God says that the voice of Abel's blood calls to me from the ground. And when I was there looking at that memorial, I thought about Michael Brown's blood calling out to us for justice. And I thought about how Michael Brown joins the cacophony of voices that have been killed due to systematic injustice, killed due to racism, and how all those voices call us to justice in whatever realm it takes. And for some of us, it's at a rally calling for Black Lives Matter. For others, it's talking to family members who say offhand, off-color things and saying, actually, that's not okay, Grandma, that you say that. Let's think about this a little bit more. So it was really a call for me to think about ways that I can help call people to their better selves as it relates to issues surrounding diversity and inclusion and ending racism.
Yeah, and what about this campaign as far as engaging other people in the community or even the whole city? Anything that people have in mind?
I think it's kind of building momentum as we go. We had 40 people and then 60 and then 100, because I think people are seeking that space to make that first step, because I agree with Ashton, it's not enough to just show up at a monthly vigil. Mm-hmm. You have to really try to live that message of Black Lives Matter every day in every interaction you have. But it's spreading. There have been more faith leaders coming, more banners put up, more opportunities for congregations then to take a stand, and we're hoping more numbers. Maybe with the weather improving, we'll actually see that happen as well.
We're also getting conflict around this, and I think most notably in Chicago, because on the one hand, we have this report that came out that said that this is a terribly racist police department, essentially, mm-hmm. and on the other hand, you have a mayor who's saying that because the police department is now showing so much restraint that there's too much crime. So, I mean, how can you reconcile or bridge what's between that gap there?
I think it's a both and. I think that we both need to call out unjust systems that oppress Black and brown people, but we also want to make sure that people are able to come to work safely and do their job safely. But I don't think that one precludes the other. I don't think that calling out racist systems that have existed over time precludes officers being able to safely do their job. And I think a conversation involving police and involving community members is how we reach a solution that will work for both.
Yeah. And finally, we should mention if people want to find out more about the vigils and other activities in Jamaica Plain, what's the best way for them to do that?
They could touch base with people at First Baptist Church in Jamaica Plain who are very involved in the mm-hmm. effort. We have a first Wednesday of every month, 5:30 to 6:30 vigil right there on the front lawn. Mm-hmm. So it would be great to have people join us.
Thank you both very much. Ann Philbin.
Thank you.
And Reverend Ashton Murray.
Thanks, Chris.